Week 15 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few kickers I look to start this week. The first guy, Brandon Aubrey of the Dallas Cowboys. So what a rookie season it's been for Brandon Aubrey, not missing any field goals. I know he's missed 3 extra points this season, but he's been very impressive in his rookie year, and he's just hitting everything, including last game, hitting a 59 and a 60-yarder versus the Philadelphia Eagles, where he went for 22 fantasy points in that one. So this week, another matchup at the Buffalo Bills, where they're bend but don't break defense for the most part this season is Buffalo. So Brandon Aubrey's on a high-powered offense. The Cowboys are putting up points. But this week versus Bill defense, especially going on the road, I think it's being a little difficult to score a majority of touchdowns like they did versus the Eagles, where they had to settle for 4 field goals in the game. So I think Aubrey, once again, is good for 2 or 3 field goals and a few extra points. And he's a start each and every week and one of the best kickers, if not the best kicker this season in fantasy football. The next kicker, Evan McPherson of the Cincinnati Bengals. Evan McPherson, he's been solid once again over the last few weeks with 3 out of 4 games with double-digit fantasy points. Week 11 at Baltimore, 10. Week 12 versus Pittsburgh, 5. Week 13 at Jacksonville, 13 fantasy points. And Week 14, Indianapolis Colts, 10. So Week 15, a good matchup versus the Minnesota Vikings coming to Cincinnati on a Saturday ball game where they give up the 6th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So Money Mac, we know he's been a clutch kicker so far in the first few years for him in the NFL. He's got unlimited range as well, like a Brandon Aubrey. And this week, in a game where this Viking defense definitely has improved over the last few weeks, shutting out the Raiders in last week's ball game, I think once again field goal opportunities will be there for McPherson, and he's a start this week. The next start, Jake Elliott of the Philadelphia Eagles. So this Eagle offense, the last 3 weeks, the numbers have definitely dropped off a little bit out of the last 4 versus tougher defenses, only scoring Week 11 in Kansas City, 21-17. In that one, the Eagles won 3 fantasy points for Elliott. Week 12, it was a shootout in an overtime victory versus Buffalo, 37-34, 9 fantasy points. Then Week 13, a loss versus San Francisco, where he had 7 fantasy points, 42-19. And then last week at the Cowboys, 10 fantasy points, losing 33-13. So defenses have figured out this offense a little bit over the last few weeks. This week, I think this Eagle team, they're going to get this offense back in the mid-20s, low 30s in this ball game at Seattle. But the Seahawks do give up the 9th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So Jake Elliott's got a good boot. He's one of the top kickers this season in points at the position. And once again, he's a start for me. The next start, Dustin Hopkins of the Cleveland Browns. So Dustin Hopkins, it's been a nice pickup for this Brown team before the season started. And then the veteran's been a solid kicker majority of the season for this Brown team. And I know this Brown offense has started to get things going over the last few weeks with, believe it or not, Joe Flacco in there in the lineup, moving the football more down the field. Passing game's definitely been improved compared to P.J. Walker, Dorian Thompson-Robinson, and even Deshaun Watson had a lot of struggles early on the season. So this week, a good matchup versus the Chicago Bears. They give up the 12th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. We've seen early in the season where he was on a stretch where he had 4 out of 5 games with double-digit fantasy points. So this week with a good matchup and a Brown offense that's getting more in the red zone now with Joe Flacco at quarterback. Even though they are scoring more touchdowns, the extra points and field goal chances still will be there for Hopkins this week. And the 5th and final kicker I start this week's Tyler Bass of the Buffalo Bills. So Tyler Bass, we know, is one of the better kickers over the last few seasons. In the last 3 weeks, he's had solid games. Week 11 versus the Jets, 15. Week 12 with Philly, 12. And Week 14 at Kansas City, 8. So this week in a matchup versus the Dallas Cowboys, a bend but don't break type of defense where a lot of teams don't find the end zone where they got to settle for field goals. I know the Cowboys don't give up a lot of fantasy points to kickers on the season, but this, I believe, is going to be a close game over there in Buffalo where a field goal or 2 definitely can make a difference. Tyler Bass, I know he got dropped in a lot of fantasy leagues after his bye week, but he's still a kicker that's out there surprisingly in 35% of fantasy leagues, and a kicker that's amongst the top kickers, in my opinion, in terms of accuracy and getting opportunities. So that's a few kickers I look to start for Week 15 of the fantasy football season.